And I'm gonna go on Facebook now.
I'll just tell my team we're going live.
1 second. Shit, 1 second. Hmm. 1 second, I'm gonna go to Facebook. And I'm going to try and
I think you should wait while we'll go live. Recording is there.
Mark Daou is in, allowed to talk. Promote to panelist. Okay. Live on Facebook. One second. Okay, let me try and do it again.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Okay, I'm gonna ask, you're on mute. Let
On
me try and unmute you. Okay, هلا صفينا نسمعك.
مرحبا.
Hi.
Hi.
كيفكم؟
Yeah,
Good. وانت؟
for some reason we're having some issues connecting live to Facebook. So let's just 1 second, guys. Sorry about that. Okay, I think I know why. So let me. Okay, لحظة شوية. Okay, now it's working. Share on page. Thawra TV. Okay, we're going live. Got it? Let us know.
I'm checking for the live feed.
Okay.
بعد ما طلع.
Just checking with the others in Beirut to see if it's live for them.
Yeah, we are live. We are live.
Okay.
We are live. Thawra TV, we are live from Beirut. I would like to welcome everybody. Thank you, Mark, for taking your time. We will be gonna be speaking in English and in Arabic because this is dedicated for the diaspora. This Zoom because they have lots of questions. We have from Washington D.C. Wissam Yafi, the author of the Lebanese Citizen Bill of Rights and so many other books on democracy, and we have Daisy in England today. She is also getting feedback from the diaspora. We're going to be asking you questions, and thank you, Mark, for coming up with us today. And this is very crucial moment of history in Lebanon, and there is lots of questions that the Lebanese people and the people voted for you, especially in the diaspora, are asking. We're going to try to summarize these and try to get the best from it. I will leave that to Daisy now. Please, Daisy, go ahead.
Hi, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Wissam, and thank you, Thawra, for introducing it. Just a general understanding of what we're going to go through. We're going to start with diving into the race for the presidential elections. We've got probably less than 2 weeks to go, 11 days or maybe even less than that for the deadline for Michel Aoun to hand over the seat of president. We are no closer to getting a president, so we're going to dive into that. 8 days. Thank you, Mark. So we'll dive into that as the primary topic today. There's a lot to discuss on that, and we have got feedback, like Thawra said, from the diaspora, as well as the Lebanese across Lebanon. And Wissam, who's very in touch with the global diaspora, will be providing insight and questions, as well as, discussion points as to what is important for the diaspora to see from the Lebanese politicians. Mark Daou, as many of you know, is one of the members of the Change Bloc. He's a politician. He's a media expert. He's got his own media company. He's a lecturer at the AUB. He does so many things. I thought I was busy, and I look at what Mark does, and I feel, okay, I'm not doing enough. But look, and again, I guess many people will say, why are we, choosing Mark? Why are we talking to the Change Bloc? And why aren't we talking to other people? I think we need to be clear that the position from our perspective is that the Change Bloc and members like Mark represent the dreams and the wishes of the majority of the Lebanese who want a state that is free, that is fair, that is accountable, that is governed properly. And those are the policies and the pillars that Mark and the members of the Change movement stand for. Doesn't mean we don't talk to other members of parliament, other politicians. But on this point, we wanted to look at the Change Bloc because there's some interesting developments that have been happening with the voting and the positions that they're taking. So I'd like to start this discussion and really open the question with where do you see, just generally right now, before we dive into more specific questions, where do you see the race for the president going, and are we likely to get an answer in the next 8 days? I know we have a session on Monday, another session in Parliament that the Speaker of the House called for another vote on Monday, the 24th of October. Mark, do you think there is any chance of the Lebanese people and Lebanon seeing a result on Monday?
Thank you for having me, Daisy, and thanks to Thawra, and good to see you, Wissam. We haven't met yet. It's long overdue. I think, honestly, no, we're not going to be getting a president anytime soon. And by soon, I mean 2022. The majority in parliament so far, the ones 55 to 60 MPs are still voting with a blank vote, literally putting no name in. There is serious work on the formation of the government. And the idea is to extend the own mandate, not him personally, but the regime or the current ahad, the tenure, to be extended as much as possible through forming a government. The formation of a government would reflect the balance of power that is currently available. All that it needs is for Michel to sign a paper, a decree agreeing to the formation of the government. And that government, by the Lebanese constitution, de facto takes over from the current existing caretaker government, and then it waits its vote of confidence in parliament. And therefore, we will have a new caretaker government awaiting a vote of confidence in parliament. And if it is formed, then most probably it will be as well given confidence by the majority, because there are two blocks that would probably go with the majority of 60 that are pro-Hezbollah and Free Patriotic Movement. Those I would expect would be the Progressive Socialist Party. They will take the Druze seats. That would add 8 votes to the 60 they have. So that's 68. And I think probably the bloc in the north is also prone to take on the seat within the government. And therefore, they might add another 10 votes to that tally. So I would expect we've got a clear majority of 78 that might be prone to vote on forming a government. That is an enough excuse to be able to form a government, but there's a political reason for it, Daisy. And I think the political reason is it is easier to handle all decisions within a government without a new president, because then it is the same split of political forces, and they would literally start cleaning up what they constitute the grab on power moving forward. So they're buying more time during the coming month, probably up to a year. And the major milestone is that Riyad Salemi, the infamous banker, will have to leave by June next year. And then after that, in a few months, the chief of the army will leave. And thus we're going to have major gaps all across the critical positions within the state. So if they form a government and that government continues to perform in full functions all the way till the end of 2023, then those people will be capable of literally taking control of the critical state positions and realigning or splitting up what is and forcing a de facto imposed situation on IMF. And anyone who signs an IMF deal or gets to an IMF deal, there is no president or union that can take the talks back to square zero. They would on what was reached. So if you've got a bank heading the government and you've got Gibran Bassil and co, the majority in the government, you can expect what type of government, what type of IMF plan, and what type of reforms we'll be getting. And I think this is the biggest risk. Our duty as Change MPs is to nominate a candidate, which we're definitely doing it on Monday. We're talking to other blocs as well, whether we like them or we don't like them, but we're talking to other individuals in parliament, members, and we're telling those that we need to start voting before the end of the term. And this is exactly what our aim is and what we're doing.
Wissam, I want to bring you in here. I mean, Mark just mentioned a very dire scenario that we're looking at and really taking us further into the hold that the current leadership has on the country, but continuing it to the detriment of Lebanon and the Lebanese people. Would you like to comment on some of the comments that Mark just brought up?
Yeah, I'll pick it up where Mark ended, really. On the first part, I think Mark's analysis is probably right on. And these guys are in control. Let's not kid ourselves. They are already, in control of parliament. They have the vast majority of parliament is Manzoumi, whether you count elements that could jump back and forth, but the vast amount are against change or fundamental change. So we could kind of count against that. The government itself is probably going to follow suit. And the president, I think, is also, it's very unlikely that you get a president who is full-blown reform under the current system. I'll pick it up where Mark left off, which is what Mark was saying in terms of choosing the next president. I think one of the major criticisms from the diaspora, and we appreciate all the work that the MPs are doing, but I think there is one thing that we would like to highlight, is that the way that the president or the names are being chosen is the same way that the traditional way of choosing them. And this in and of itself weakens all our position as change, because sometimes it's process that makes change as opposed to just the name. You can bring another name using the same process and it's not really changing much. The process of choosing such a person, whoever that person is what we're hoping us in Change see, and we're not seeing it. Meaning, today I just got a list of all the potential presidential aspirants. There's 36 of them, 36. I'm dialing in from DC, and as you know, the Democratic Party, I think at some point last year or the year 4 years ago had I think 15 or 16, and they thought that was like crazy for a country this size. In Lebanon, it's a country of 10,452 square kilometers, if we can maintain our borders, that is. And we have 36 aspirants. Now, not all of them have nominated themselves. But guess what? I don't know what a single one of them actually aims to do or will do or is committing for or will commit for my MPs. I have no idea. As a citizen, as an expat, as an activist, I'm more involved than many other people, and I still don't know. And so one of the weaknesses that I see in what's happening through this presidential election on the change side, and I'll be self-critical because I am with change, is that we are not changing the process of how we choose those. There were elements of this that were absolutely amazing during the parliamentary run-ups. We had some things in the north where you had people debating each other. You had naqabet in the guilds. They were debating each other. They were presenting. Now, granted, the president is supposed to be this kind of godfather figure that judges and all that, but I still would like to know what sort of a person or what sort of policies that person represents. And we don't. And so what I would urge the change MPs to do going forward is, if they do have some names, then let that be the first step in choosing such a person, not the last. They can pick some people based on some criteria, based on some political savviness that the MPs might have on the inside that the general populace might not. But once you have that short list of people, have them presented to the people, have them be able to discuss with the people, have them be able to compete for that, have them be hungry for that position, because it's not going to be easy. They're going to have to work really, really hard when they do get, if they ever do get, and the odds are they will not get it. But in the very least, as change, we would be showing that we are coming in with changed methods. And that so far, unfortunately, I'm not seeing, and many others aren't seeing it either.
I'll just jump in before Mark responds to that, because I'm sure he's got a response, and just say that I think that the change MPs did provide an outline, a criteria. I think that was one of the things that they did before they started looking for a candidate who they have got a list of candidates. But I think their first step, from what my discussions with them and questions with them earlier a month or so ago, was that they wanted to create a criteria, a profile of what Lebanon needed before they went into just, finding who that profile would fit the candidates. Mark, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you for the comments, and I do agree that changing the process is critical for us to get a different result. And therefore, the first thing we did as a bloc is to launch the presidential initiative, where we outlined our political perspectives and the criteria and what we think are the suitable criteria for selecting a president. Second thing we did is we made this an open process by which we visited all the parliamentary blocs, had that discussion with them, because this is not a popular election like in the US where citizens vote. It's literally 128 people who will decide, and they have crucial interests within the system or as blocs and opinions. So the criteria for them to select the president is varying between one party and the other. So we did the write-up, we did the visits, followed by we shortlisted the candidates that were mentioned to us or that came up to us and introduced themselves. And then based on that, we did an internal exercise of practically checking out who the candidates that were most convincing for us. We ended up with a short list. Then we interviewed that short list of 3. And basically, we visited them, we had talks with them, we discussed the outlines of their programs. Now, we do prefer that those candidates actually hold press conferences and announce their programs and launch them. Some candidates have already done that, and they have shared their programs and sent their programs to us, which I think is a commendable thing. It's exceptionally good. Others that we're talking to, some of them are still hesitant to do that, and therefore they have their own conditions, because again, the political culture in Lebanon when electing a president is to wait for the agreement of the majority of the MPs, because it's a parliamentary election system of a president, and therefore interpersonal relations with the members of parliament is more important or more critical than public statements where you run the risk of upsetting a certain bloc versus another. And also, given that electing a president in Lebanon requires a quorum of 2/3 of parliament, this makes electing a president at least require, if they're not voting for you, at least they're willing to attend. And there is no way to elect a president who gets less than half plus one of the total number of MPs, which is 65. So therefore, the requirements are very high to elect a president. And thus, to be able to do that, the nomination process, the election process is also limited by the constitutional laws that we have.
So if I may comment here, Daisy, Mark, the modus operandi, the traditional modus operandi, we all know it. And we don't disagree that this is how things and the culture in Lebanon has done. We as change have to come in with methods that put a big question mark on those methods. If I have to go to Nabih Berri or Basil or Miqati or whoever the powers that be to get approval for the next president, in and of itself, that's not much change. However, if I take everything that you stated, which is the criteria, people presenting themselves, etc., and then I open it up to the people, not for a popular vote, we're not that gullible, but your strength as Mark Daou, as Paula, as Waddah, as whoever else, Rami, etc., all, your power is from the people. And your power within parliament is nothing if you don't go back to those people. I'm not talking theory here, I'm talking actual practice. The only reason you are being listened to by these people, by these 128 or 115 others, is because of the power base you've got. Imagine how much more effective for you it would be if you still played those political games that these guys are accustomed to, but at the same time, you're coming in with a popular mandate for 1, 2 names or 3 names, whatever it is, with somebody who's tried and tested, who has sat down with the people, talked to the people, listened to the people, made the effort. I don't want him to just call Mark Daou. I want him to go in a car, go up to the Seha in Tripoli and talk to the people. I want him to go and talk to the people in Ba'a. I want him to talk to the people in Jnub. I want him to talk to the people in South. That gives that person strength, and it gives you strength as you propose their name. That is what we are not seeing.
I really understand what Wissam is saying, Mark. I think it is hard to sort of adapt to what the system is and the rules and the processes in Lebanon. But I think Wissam has a very enlightened perspective here that is also playing, it's almost like playing against the hand of the current system, against them, by bringing that force from the people. And I think it also allows the global leaders to see that if this person is really well respected by not just MPs within the parliament, but also the people, because they've explained who they are, the diaspora agrees with them, and the people of Lebanon agree with them. It also becomes a pressure. It puts pressure on global leaders, the ambassadors, and other global leaders to maybe fall in line, because if they truly believe in democracy, truly believe in the will of the people, it's really forcing their hand. So I like the concept that you're proposing, and I think we've seen it around the world in different countries. So I don't know if it's still possible, but what I want to do is we need to jump ahead, because we've got to dive into a few more things, and specifically, maybe you can take that on advisement, Mark, and come back to us. But I think it's a really solid idea that could be discussed more fully, but with respect to what we're talking about right now and where we are right now, let's just dive into what's happened in the last 3 votes for the president. We had Michelle Mawad has been the individual that's been receiving the most votes. Otherwise, it's really insignificant to look at anyone else. It's irrelevant. As you mentioned, the white paper is being put forward by 3 parties, Amal, Hezbollah and Tayar. And I'm sure we all know it's because they haven't decided yet. But let's look at the proposition of a Michel Mawad as president. I got the chance to speak to quite a few MPs on Thursday after the 3rd vote, including Sitri Dajaja, who is, a leading MP for the Lebanese forces. And she was very clear about why they were putting their votes behind Michel Mawad. And I asked a few of the Change MPs, Dr. Najat Saliba and Milham Khalaf, about the reason why the Change bloc wasn't voting for Michel Mawad. But I'd like to sort of discuss this, if we can, as briefly as possible to move through it. But you have mentioned, and I'd like you to come back to the fact that why no for Michel Mawad, and the second point is why you aren't telling us who you are, putting your vote behind. We've got a couple of names but you're not telling us who those names are. So if you could enlighten us on that, that would be very helpful.
Okay, excellent. 2 things. First, Michel Mawad. And the parliament today is kind of divided into 3 major blocks. Okay, so there's the Hezbollah allied parties, there's the opposition parties like those who were in the establishment and left, and then there's the Change group, okay, which is of a different DNA, coming from a different perspective that represents a totally different expectation, especially when it comes to reforming, whether on the administrative level, their positions on economic reform, their positions towards sectarianism and the splitting of sectarian balances within the state, and the performance overall of MPs over the past 30 years. They reflect the new blood and they have a totally different approach. So when we came into the presidential election, the strategies differed based on the identity of each group. So the Hezbollah allied group wants someone who is of no threat to them, that is aligned with them, and who will help recycle their grip on power. So they're waiting until they form a consensus on that, and they have an internal issue between the Birri bloc, who wants Slimane Frangi, and the Jubran Basil bloc that prefers to find an alternative. And therefore, Hezbollah is waiting for his 2 allies to end the feud, or at least decide to step in when the time is right. But I don't think Hezbollah's too keen on electing a president who is totally loyal to them, because they want to be in the opposition as well, given that the last time they had to defend Abda, no matter how much it cost them, and it cost them a lot, reaching up to the 17th of October and what happened after that. The second block is basically the opposition that left the establishment. And their approach is more focused on a balance of power, regaining a balance of power versus Hezbollah's grab on the system. And their bet is we want to have the crippling power, the 1/3 of parliament, or a bigger number, that would basically squeeze others into a negotiation to allow for an equal sharing or power, or a more balanced sharing of power within the state. Okay. Now, the third group is us that are trying to approach this in the sense that we need to make a break with the system, and we shouldn't allow the old establishment to re-establish control on both branches of the executive power. Now, we don't have the numbers to win. We know that. But that doesn't mean that we don't try to influence those blocks in parliament to try and opt for options that we propose, that we have agreed with on our initiative and on our ideas of change and reform, both when it comes to sovereignty, or it comes to reforming the public sector, or the financial reforms required by the IMF, or the electricity and other approaches to what Lebanon's role today is and how Lebanon should be governed. Therefore, we are not choosing Michel Mawad because our opinion is we need a fresh start in the state. And that fresh start in the state requires that someone is sovereign, like the ex-March 14th, if you want, but also someone who's a reformist and who doesn't drag with them a history of corruption or alliances or others. So we're trying to build that kind of approach so we can move forward. Now, the challenge we are having when it comes to proposing names, which is your second question, is this. If we propose a name all by our own, is it enough to actually break of the others, and can we force their hand? The answer so far is no, we can't. So now the second question is, are we willing to compromise if we can't get someone who's fully reflective of our approach to governance? Can we break or can we reach a consensus-based agreement with others, at least on how to form a government, the president, some of the critical policies of the incoming presidency that we can agree on? And that's the second debate. Can we do that or not? Because currently our main reason for power, besides our public support and political narrative, is that the Hezbollah alliance has no consensus, and the people on the sovereignty front, like the Lebanese forces and others, don't have the numbers. So we have leverage on both, and we're trying to make the best use of that leverage to try and come up with the best possible result within the presidency. And since Michel Maouad is representing a camp and a plan, and there are others representing a camp and a plan, we're representing our own camp and a plan, and therefore it's not in our interest, politically speaking, no matter what I think of Michel Maouad, who is someone I know very well, we've worked a lot with, that positioning, despite the character, it might be him or someone else, doesn't fit our political objectives of creating an approach that is reflective of the reformist approach and agenda that we want.
Okay. Thawra, did you have some questions on this?
I wanted to ask about how important is the maritime border and the Route 29 to electing a new president. How يعني قدامهم يعني مصير المرحله المقبله بيتعلق بالترسيم الحدود. ترسيم الحدود هو بيقرر اي رئيس مقبل للمنطقه جاي، وناطرين مؤتمر دولي. يعني شفنا السفاره السويسريه كانت عم تعمل شيء، في معقول في مؤتمر دولي تحضير ل شيء جديد بده يصير؟
خليني اجاوب من بدك تجاوب بالعربي ولا بالانجليزي طارق؟
English لانه this is for the diaspora بس
okay, that's fine.
I forgot.
So I don't think, I would, let us not be gullible about this. The deal that was signed was clearly signed with, the US is very happy about it. The French seem to be happy about it. There wasn't enough objections from the Iranians on it, which means Hezbollah basically did not oppose it. These are the main, let's say, the main players. And of course, regionally, you're looking at Israel and Syria. Israel is happy with the deal. The Syrians now want a deal on their northern border. So in all of this, I don't think that the international community per se is against it. So from that perspective, the deal doesn't hurt the chances of kind of greasing some things. Now, will that deal actually help? I'm one who's against that deal personally. I live here in Washington, D.C. I've looked at the deal, etc., and I don't think it's the interest of the Lebanese people. This specific deal. I would like to see a deal on the three fronts, meaning with Syria, with Israel, and with Cyprus, but this was not the deal. And it wasn't a deal that was aligned with international law, meaning it's a problem for the future deals, because now the Syrian brothers are going to say, well, you didn't apply international law with your enemy. Are you going to apply it with your brothers? That's a major problem. I mean, you can't apply international law, in an on-off method. You either apply it to everybody or you don't. And so the deal in and of itself, I don't think is stabilizing in the long term. I think actually the international community was desperate for a deal. I failed to mention the Europeans, by the way. The Europeans can't be unhappy with the deal because they need the gas and they need it as soon as possible. So all in all, I think the international community is not unhappy with the maritime deal, but we will be as Lebanese people. Now, will this facilitate a Lebanese president? It depends. It depends, because I think for the direct effects of the maritime deal on Lebanon per se, locally, I'm talking locally, are zero. We will not be able to extract anything for a number of years, and so there won't be an all of a sudden a relinquishing of like funds. Any funds, by the way, you mentioned IMF, etc. Any funds that will be released, and IMF is just down the road from where I am. So I have friends at IMF, World Bank, etc. Any deal from those guys, any facilitation of deals from those guys is going to, in all likelihood, have to mortgage, if this Manzoumi stays in power, if this regime stays in power, is going to have to mortgage the future earnings, because no country in its right mind will give Lebanon anything right now without actually asking for something in return. And we're talking sizable loans, like if we're talking in the billions. They will not give Lebanon these kinds of resources without asking for something in return. What is that thing in return? What can we offer in return? Well, one of the things we can offer in return is a mortgaging of our reserves. That is what the regime, I believe, hopes. So all in all, the point I'm making here is that there is not really necessarily an immediate positive economic effect on the Lebanese. And so there will continue to be bickering within the local environment, just like what Mark just described, the three different, let's say, elements that have voting powers or blocs within parliament. And it might not mean that this happens anytime soon. Last time around, 6 years ago, I think it went to how many rounds? Correct me if I'm wrong, Mark. Was it like a few dozen rounds before a final election happened?
47.
52?
47 times.
52, I think.
52, okay.
They voted 47 times, 52. There are some sessions where they didn't vote.
Yeah, so 52 times they didn't vote. It could very well take as long now. Now the international community is not under any pressure. Europe is not under any pressure to sign the gas deal. Now they've signed it. The Israelis are under no pressure. The Americans have offloaded a headache. So the international community, I don't think is compelled to bring a president. Will it make a difference in Lebanon, having a president or not? Immediately, I don't think this president has made much of a difference one way or the other right now. I mean, you feel that there's a vacancy. I mean, it's like, except for this deal that he's claiming victory for, which is a very negative thing. I think
he did a big difference with some, but not in the positive sense.
Yeah, you could look at it that way. But in terms of like proactively doing much, I mean, it was his parliamentary, Basil and all of these guys. But as a person, he retired in office basically, and so I'm not sure if there's anything conducive right now for an immediate presidency to emerge.
The oil and gas in Lebanon, is it a blessing or curse on Lebanon?
In its current state?
Can I just jump in here? Because I think we're confusing our audience a little bit. We jumped from discussing really deeply the race for the presidency into the oil and gas, which we want to get to. But I don't think we've really closed off the discussion on the situation in relation to the presidency. But on that point, we heard from Mark talking about the reasons behind not voting or getting behind Michelle Awad, the reasons why they have not given us the names for the new candidates that they're putting forward. But what is the strategy? Let's just close that off. What is the next vote going to look like, Mark, on Monday when we, go to Parliament? What's going to happen there? Because it seems like you're very clear on the strategies they're putting in place to play. They're playing the politics right now, which is, what politicians do. But before we move to oil and gas, what should we be aware of that's going to happen in relation to the race for the presidency?
The major changes on Monday, I believe the majority of the change group, or the vast majority of the change group, have decided to put in a name. And the current discussions is on the final choice of the name. And for the coming, I expect there are 3 more electoral sessions, the 24th, the 27th, and the 31st, which is the Monday next. So fundamentally, we're looking at 3 more sessions where we have a chance to elect a president within the term before Aoun's term expires. After that, when we go into a vacuum in the presidency, I think the dynamics will also warrant or not. If we don't have a government, then the priority will continue to be the presidency. If we have a government, then the presidency will be of secondary importance to the primacy of forming a cabinet and giving it confidence, and the cabinet continuing with the major law, which is the bank restructuring law that is linked also with a capital control law, and from there, seeing how things go with the IMF. So it might be overpowered. The presidency might be overpowered if we have a new government and it prioritizes financial and economic reforms. So that is the situation. Now, I'd like to add something on this, that it is fundamental for the change group to do their job and duty as they should, fully and completely, and put in a name and vote for it and lobby with other groups to do it. Whether they're successful or not is not linked to them doing that job completely. There is a lot of room to negotiate. If we go into a vacuum, then we're dealing with a reality. But before that constitutional term expires, we should run a candidate and we should make sure our voices are heard and our choice seen before we get to the vacuum.
Just on that point, when you put forward the name, will you also be clarifying why you have put forward that name, or is it just what we've seen in Parliament? You put forward the name and people vote for that person or that person. Do we understand why the change bloc, will we understand why the change bloc has backed this candidate?
Yes, we will be issuing a statement. If we endorse someone, we should announce that before the session and then do that. But again, this is a discussion to be had within the bloc to finalize the deal. First the name, then how the steps that follow will happen.
If I may, Daisy, the problem, Mark, that a lot of us in the change supporters see is that even the process within the change MPs is causing a lot of conflict, and you know that. We are a truthful bunch, and so it's okay if we self-criticize ourselves. There are several procedural elements, even within the MPs, that we don't know why there are some splintering or where is some splintering happening. But when you do have some splinters occurring with some MPs going off, it tends to imply that even the democratic process, the mini democratic process, if you will, within this cluster of change MPs, realizing they come from different parties and different marja'iyat, if you will, etc. But generally speaking, as a cluster or a coalition, is there a democratic method that is being deployed so that if you do come up with a name, you're 13, so it's an odd number. You're gonna eventually get to either 6 out of or 7, beat the 6 or whatever. Is there a process that democratically is expected by this coalition so that there is not that democratic splintering happening? Because you throw a name, the other guy throws a name. Who's to say, your name is better than his name, unless there is some form of democratic method that is followed, either popular or in the very least internal. Sorry, I took your thunder from this question, Daisy, but this is a thought that has been really bothering many of us activists within change. And it really bothered us to see the splintering that happened.
Thank you for the question. I actually definitely want to speak about that one, because we've been discussing that. There are two ways to run a bloc. Either you have a dictator or you have a democratic process. All blocs in Lebanon, or the majority, are dictatorships by the Zaim. Ours should be democratic. Unfortunately, some of the members within our bloc insist on us not having a mechanism, but rather depending on a unanimous decision, which never happens when you have 13 people and one of them is, whether for good reason or not, might say no. So yes, the reasons we've been slow to initiate and kickstart is because there is no governance decision-making structure that is inside the bloc that is functional and agreed to by the members. There has been several suggestions, including 2/3 voting with a joint secretariat, a common office, working teams, etc. Unfortunately, the bylaws were not discussed. I wrote them, honestly, and I submitted them to the group. But for now, there are a couple of MPs who believe we should agree first on the common political issues and build trust among the 13 before we can agree to a voting process. I am of the opinion that it's the voting process that allows people to debate openly. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but at least you build an institution that will allow you to move forward. So an important point, and I would love for the diaspora, for the activists and the others to pitch in their opinions to all the members of the bloc of 13. So they realize, at least my opinion is, they should realize that without a governance process, there is no way we can continue to work on consensus.
Okay, there's so much more I could ask, and we could delve into this so much more, but we don't have a lot of time. And I think we do need to jump into the oil and gas agreement because, you know, Wissam has already explained that the general diaspora is not very happy with that. And Mark, you have a lot of expertise and insight into this area. I did ask you about that not long ago when we were in Parliament, but I think what we need to do is just explain where we stand if Lebanon agrees and it is approved, if it is sent to Parliament to be approved, because I believe it should be according to the governance of the Constitution, that this has to be passed by the Parliament. But it seemed like nothing really changed, as you mentioned to me, in the agreement from the one that Dorothy Shea submitted to AON several weeks ago now, and why suddenly within a week everyone was happy and the deal was made. I think a lot of people have suspicion. I've heard from a lot of people wondering about what has actually happened and how we're suddenly happy. But you know, Wissam is also extremely knowledgeable on this point. We've given away, Wissam was telling me earlier, 2,000 kilometers to the Cypriots. We're about to give away another 2,000 kilometers to the Israelis. We're giving away the house, basically, lock, stock, and almost barrel. What is left for the Lebanese people? I'd like to open this up to both of you to debate this and share with the Lebanese people and share with the diaspora what's happened with the gas and oil deal.
Yeah, let me just clarify a couple of points. I wouldn't necessarily, you know, classify it as giving away, because ultimately it's a negotiation. But what we gave away is the negotiation itself. And our concern as Lebanese patriots, you know, is, and internationalists, to be quite honest, is we would love to see a deal that is stable and sustainable. When a deal is so wishy-washy, signed by a regime that is so questionable, it's in its own intentions, means, and ways, etc., and when it's kind of, you know, just completely out of the blue, passed through, without really a strong justification in terms of Why are you not, for example, determining the last point of your border? Why isn't that your starting point? Why did you decide to, for example, postpone certain issues that will have repercussions on the actual maritime area? It will. Why, for example, are you ceding away the sovereignty over how an international oil company and an enemy state negotiate, which will ultimately affect, your own status? Are you going to be renegotiating, for example, your own agreement with that oil company, which predated this deal and actually had large portions of the concessions based on the fact that it's insecure to work in those areas? Well, it's secure now. Are you going to renegotiate with those guys? What happens if the negotiation between that oil company and the Israelis doesn't work out, doesn't pan out? What happens then? There are a lot of question marks. And, in many cases, us Lebanese, or at least the Lebanese establishment, is excellent, just absolutely excellent at kicking the can down the road. I don't think there's an equal to the Lebanese establishment in kicking the can down the road on every single issue, constitutional, oil, whatever it is, energy, etc. And in this case, they did that. And this is not a stabilizing motion. And so our problem with it is, first, from a Lebanese perspective, it was an unpatriotic position. At least start the negotiation can you imagine, when we were calling for the starting of the negotiation in line 29, some people were attacking us, saying that you're just supporting a Hezbollah position. They were attacking us as patriots, as supporting Hezbollah. Hezbollah ended up accepting this deal, and we have not yet. The reason for it is because it's a legal position. It's a technical strong position. It could have been a much stronger starting position. They didn't do that. And so, yes, we've lost a huge amount, 1,430 kilometers on the Israeli side. We've lost a huge amount or ceded a huge amount. That's still negotiable on the Cypriot side. And we're likely to lose a large amount now as a result with the Syrians as well, because they're going to say, hey, you didn't use international law with your enemy. Are you going to use it with your brothers? It's just, this whole deal is badly structured. It's a desperate move by a desperate regime to try and mortgage the future by basically getting anything in return for this deal. And we don't think that should have been the process.
Mark?
Yeah, I think this has been mismanaged from the start. And then private political interests took over. It is not by mistake that General Aoun or President Aoun, when he issued his statement on the conclusion of the negotiations, he basically thanked Gibran Bassil by name and the Free Patriotic Movement. And then Gibran Bassil issues a statement saying he was involved in all the details and that he was heavily involved in this, and that the key contact person is Ilyas Abu Saad, who is from the same bloc or party. So I think we'll be very gullible if we assume that the negotiation was done with the best interest of Lebanon at heart, rather than the best interest of those negotiating at heart, as well as whatever we can get to Lebanon. Second is, we had a good technical negotiating team. We had a very strong position, whether in maritime law or others. But the problem in this negotiation also is the special complexity is that the state of Lebanon does not recognize a state in Israel, and therefore we cannot agree to arbitration, negotiation, or even lawsuits between states, given that we don't recognize them as a state. So there was that complexity, and this is why the end result now is not the signing of an agreement, but it is a pledge, a list of commitments and pledges by each side that are sent to the Americans, by which the United States government works as the guarantor of the agreement. So they will take the pledges from both parties, and they will literally commit to applying the terms or supervising the application of the terms. And if there are any changes, then we take it up with the Americans to deal with it and negotiate. So practically, even if you go deeper into the suggested agreement that was leaked by an Israeli journalist, It also puts a limitation in the sovereign blocks that are the Lebanese areas, because it says no one that is blacklisted or on sanctions lists. So technically, you already gave leverage on selection of which companies can operate. And I believe such terms for the agreement are undermining Lebanese sovereignty to a certain extent, because we no longer are the sole deciders of commercial operations in oil and gas within our sovereign district. So I think there are major issues with the ongoing agreement. I wouldn't deny, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's out there that people try to serve their personal interest as well. Najib Miati, the current minister, is the person who agreed to line 23 and did the decree 6,433, which demarcated our region based on line 23, not 29. So he doesn't want to backtrack and say, I committed a major mistake 10 years ago. So he also has an interest in covering himself up with this. So I think those on power today have an interest of agreeing to such a deal and trying to promote it as a win instead of doing something else. But third, and the most important thing, in my opinion, is the framework for the agreement, the framework for the negotiations to reach an agreement mentioned that there shouldn't be a separation between land and sea. Unfortunately, they agreed to the line 23, but they didn't anchor it in a physical point on land, which means that the territorial dispute will continue for about 3 miles in the water and on the borders continuously. Thus, with that still open, this will allow for continuous excuses for Hezbollah to decide that this is a violation and they launch an attack, or the Israelis would claim that there is a violation and they would launch an attack as well.
I mean, it's mind-boggling listening to you say this, because, you know, I listened to an interview of the chief US negotiator, Amos Hochstein, who, and I also saw the US ambassador recently, and I saw members of other embassies who all seem to be promoting the positive aspects of this deal and saying how beneficial this is going to be for Lebanon, even though we're not going to see any oil or gas coming out of the ground for another 5 to 6 years, because of maybe the economic turnaround, the jobs that'll be created, because so much infrastructure has to be built to make this happen. Are they selling us down the river? Are they trying to just make the Lebanese feel like there's a you know, this window of opportunity for us, giving us a hope of a bubble of regrowth and economic activity, so that we will turn a blind eye to the long-term damage that you both have now outlined is where Lebanon's going to end up, with a major, you know, fallout or a failure for the future of the country. I can't see any positiveness in this deal. I can't see anything that is actually clear that is in the benefit of Lebanon. It all seems to be a deal done behind the scenes to serve the interests, as you said, Mark, and you too, Wissam, of individuals who are going to continue to benefit at the expense of the Lebanese people. And yet, when the interview with Hochstein, he was so positive and pleasant about how good this is for Lebanon. So who really won? Did America really come out on top out of this whole deal that's just happened?
I mean,
is it, sorry, one quick question, sorry. Is it related to Vienna Agreement in any way? The maritime border? Right.
I don't know if it would be, but I'm sure there is some sort of a link, and I'm sure that has got some form of an acquiescence from, you know, their patrons, or at least, you know, not a rejection. So it could be in somehow related. But I'll go back to the question of Daisy. Daisy, it ultimately, how the West deals with certain nations depends on how these nations organize themselves. You will see that a lot of their dealings with autocratic nations are very practical in the sense that they will deal with the autocrat. They will get the energy out. They will pay them what they owe them. But ultimately, they'll siphon off the money after this autocrat gets run out of office and he has his money in Switzerland or France or whatever. So it's a nice circular thing that the West has done left, right, and center. How can you get out of this cycle of them looking at Lebanon as an if it's not a full autocracy, it's a form of regime that is completely dominating the decision-making process. I go back to my point, which is the people. You have 128 MPs running pretty much everything. They run parliament, they run the cabinet, they run the presidency, they run the judiciary, they run most of the appointments. Parliament has become extremely powerful in Lebanon, and it's not just this year. I mean, it's been happening since Thawra, right? And so, of course, they're gonna. The West looks at, okay, who do we deal with? You get, what's his name, Macron coming in from France. Who is he gonna deal with? You know, he's gonna deal with the people in power, right? And unless the people change these people in power, they're going to continue to deal with those regimes. And so, did the West do what's in the interest of the West? Yes. Hochstein is going to be extremely happy. Shea is going to be extremely happy. The Europeans are relieved. Sure. Why wouldn't they? If you put yourself in their shoes, it's fine. But have the Lebanese people themselves had a say in all of this? And the answer is no, they haven't. We're just starting to get some people, some heroes, what I would call them heroes, coming out, professors and the former army negotiators and MPs and these are heroes that are coming out and saying no. So my question would be to all of these people is, what are we going to do in court? What are we going to do in international court? You know, if you can't do it inside, then do it outside. Sue, go to the UN, go to any organization that's willing. Put in an objection, because you never know how the wheel turns.
But
we should. Go ahead.
But can we do that? Will it make any effect if the diaspora or other members, within Lebanon, put forward an appeal or put forward an objection in those institutions? Are they going to listen to us? Do we have a leg to stand on? We're not rulers of the country.
They don't have a choice except to listen to us. Will it change the policy? I'm not sure. Is there a way that we could go to the UN, for example, some of the courts within the UN? The problem is we did this deal outside of the international law. I mean, they diverted the negotiations from international law, stupidly so. And so it's very hard now to go back to international law. You basically gave up. You're right. If you're stupid enough to do it, how can the international court? But the question here is when I say when you're stupid enough, the key word is you. Who's the you? We have to question that you. We have to say that the you was not the people. The you was not Lebanon. The you was this group, a regime that's corrupt, that basically destroyed the country. Exactly. That's what we have to prove. And then where it goes from there, then that becomes essentially the issue. If we did have a democracy, or if we could prove, you said it in the beginning of this interview, you said it and you said it very well. You said these leaders, the international leaders, will listen to people when the people voice themselves, or if they have channels of voicing themselves. But if nobody says anything.
Yeah. Mark? Do you have something to contribute?
Yes. Honestly, I think we can challenge this because remember, there's no agreement that is signed between two parties. This is a series of pledges or commitments sent by each. Now, even if Lebanon commits, if on the 1st of November, the Israeli government elects Netanyahu, it doesn't like the deal, he's going to be sending an email with no pledges, and he's going to pick up that fight. This is how fragile this agreement is. So the fight on it is not yet done. And I think the early celebrations of victory are similar to the celebrations of victory a few years ago when Total came and did a drill test in Block 4. And then we had the president on TV saying, we're an oil country now. And suddenly we had the financial crisis, the entire meltdown. And all we got is gas, not the one we can burn. So the idea is
the one we produce.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So basically, I think this is a very fragile solution. I think the more solid solution is a complete demarcation of the borders, land and sea, a proper negotiation that includes even security guarantees, because even this set of emails includes security guarantees for platforms and companies, so they are willing to perform and they can buy insurance based on it. So therefore, this is a requirement. And this is why I think, yes, this is related to guarantees by Iran that they will not issue orders that Hezbollah attack the Israeli platforms. And I think Amos Hochstein basically mentioned that when he said that this is a push towards regional stability. And I don't think he meant Lebanon and Israel on their own. He meant the broader region. So that is my 2 cents on that one.
Are the MPs, do you know, Mark, if the change MPs are getting ready to drive any legal action? Either
we
not
already
within
submitted.
Parliament, because we already know the answer of Birde within Parliament, but outside of Parliament, either within the Supreme Court of Lebanon or outside. Do you know of any initiative that's
by law, there's no way you can object to an email being sent by a president to a foreign president, right? You can claim to ask for the access to information, so you have the right to ask for what was sent. But we cannot literally vote against something that is not a law or a decree. And that's exactly what they're doing, a gentleman's agreement that is confirmed by the Americans, but there's no solid signature on anything. So we're trying to understand what the details are, and based on that documentation. So what we did is we asked for a special session in Parliament to discuss whatever they are sending before they send it. We signed it. A few other blocs like the Kata'ib Sami Jmail and Usama Saad signed it with us. So we're pushing towards that one. So we bring light on the details of the agreement, and therefore know which course to take, whether in Lebanon or abroad.
There is a letter that was sent by Lebanon as a state, if you recall, a few months ago to the UN, which highlighted that was an official letter by the Lebanese, not an email. It was an official letter, and it was basically, posted by the UN as well. And by the UN, I mean the UN agency that's responsible for receiving those. Does it become the battle of the legality of the letters? Because one letter essentially...
Letters are not decrees. So the letter sent by the Lebanese government to the UN did not change the registered map by decree 6,433. So it is just FYI, we have this perspective, but it didn't say this is the final decision. Yeah, so there is no final commitment. That letter does not reflect Lebanon's official position on the borders.
Correct, such as this letter. That's what your point that you were making.
This is why I'm saying it's fragile.
So it becomes the battle of the letters as opposed to a real agreement that could be taken to court, etc.
Yeah, and it's easily done to backtrack from a letter than a proper agreement. Not sure how much leverage the US has over Israel when it comes to violating a letter sent as a guarantee to Lebanon. I don't think they're
the biggest fear that some of the expats have in this case, Mark and Daisy, is that and Thawra, is that the minute, according to UNCLOS, the minute you start extracting, it de facto basically establishes your right. And in this case, clearly they're going to start extracting very soon. And so that becomes a de facto right. Time was and still of the essence. Are we looking at this time element? Is there anything that we could do? You know, we might not recognize the letter, but they're still extracting, or they're going to still be extracting.
Is,
how are we looking at this issue from our change MPs? Because we need to move somehow. We need to object. And we need to place a position. I don't know how legal a position from the people or from part of the parliament is, but what's your take on that? On the fact that extracting is going to create a de facto, basically right, particularly over a large
legally, yeah, legally it is. If they start extracting, then it's their right, but it doesn't mean they will be able to operate it, because if there are no security guarantees, no one's sending $1 billion platform and waiting for a rocket to hit it. Or if it's contested, I think a lot of international companies will back up from operating a contested field, even if it is, like you said, they started drilling. The fastest way for us to legally do it before that is to elect a president, and the president says, I'm not doing this deal. So that is the fastest way.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And there's a lot of, by you saying this is very interesting. The fact that it's a pledge, it's not an agreement, is very important that the world knows about this, especially the Lebanese diaspora, because I think that what's happening, and this is played in politics a lot and a lot in American politics, but around the world, that they're trying to create a fait accompli situation. And if they start drilling, it's like Wissam said, possession is 9/10 of the law. So they're forcing, these little maneuvers are actually making the Lebanese believe, including myself, that it's done, the deal is done. But in fact, you're saying to us, Mark, there is no real deal. There's a conversation, there's a gentleman's agreement, there's some pledges, there's emails, but there's no, treaty that's been signed defining clearly what the boundaries are and the concessions are. They're just some words on an email, as you've put it. So we should be doing what Wissam's saying and getting out there very loudly and clearly right now, as many people as possible, putting forward as many objections as possible. And also, I think we need to be calling it out, Mark, in Parliament or in the media in Lebanon and wherever you're able to speak about it, and say exactly what you just said, that it's really, this is not a formal agreement. This is a pledge between two people, according with a third-party negotiator that's been taken outside international law structure. So it's actually a joke, and we should not be giving it the seriousness it deserves, because we can walk away from this as easily as President Daou has sent an email about it. I think we need to clarify that.
May I push back a little bit on this element of it's not an agreement? Definitely, I agree with Mark on the point that it's not an agreement between Lebanon and Israel, because we don't recognize, and who you don't recognize, you can't really deal with. But it could very well be a legal agreement between Lebanon and the US.
Yeah. And
that's an even worse issue, because for us, at least, and it could be, if it's an agreement between us and the US, it can be signed as an agreement. Now, of course, Birre tried to get out of it, and when our change MPs requested a session to be made in Parliament, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, Birre came out of it and said, we don't really need to do that because we're not signing an agreement with Israel. But he didn't really say why we wouldn't have a parliamentary session if we're signing an agreement with the US, because that's another nation and that is an agreement. So if it is an agreement with the US, and I believe it is, I won't be quoted on it, but all the terminology that has been used in the US has been that it is an agreement. I would double check the legality of that, because if Lebanon enters into an agreement with the US, then that's an even bigger deal for us, because you don't want to be crossed with the US at some point. So I would push back on that and review that point. But regardless, I think independent of this, I think our duty as for our people is we need to stand up and say we don't agree to, whether it's an email, whether it's an agreement, call it whatever you want. We don't agree to it. We don't believe that it is it's sustainable. We don't agree. We don't believe it's legal. And we don't believe that it was done in the interests of the people, but rather in the interests of the specific parties that Mark well alluded to earlier.
we have to wrap up a bit. I know it's more than 1 hour. Mark, the next step. We have 9 more days to go, and this after these 9 more days, what to expect? We're gonna have chaos. We're gonna have vacancy. We're gonna have alternative government. Is it? We're going to the unknown. Is it gonna be darker than it is today? Is it? تاريخ ما بيرحم. We are in a very crucial situation. In 9 more days, nobody knows what's going to happen. What do you expect to see in 9 more days?
Well, I wish I knew, but I can tell you what we can do in the coming 9 days. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be voting for a president, attending all the sessions, and shouting our lungs out to make sure that people stay in Parliament and they keep on discussing until they get to a conclusion where we allow for a proper democratic transition to a new term of a president. And other than that, we have to deal with facts and realities and the balances of power that are here. Doesn't mean we're going to accept them. We didn't accept them 3 years ago when the Intifada started back in 17 October. We didn't accept them after the 4th of August explosion, and we didn't accept the realities when we ran for parliament. No one expected we'll do what we did. So I think between now and the few months coming, we have to keep on fighting all those fronts, because if there is a new president, then we have succeeded in enforcing the transition. If there is no president, then we have a tougher fight against a government that is intent on saving the establishment and the regime and covering up for the past crimes. And we have that tough fight to do. And I think we need to be ready for the second round of post-Aoun. But at least look at the bright side. Aoun would have left. That isn't a bad thing.
That's a good thing.
On that note, I think we'll wrap it up. And I really want to thank Wissam, Yafi in Washington, D.C., Mark Daou in, I believe, are you in Beirut or the Shuf? I'm not sure where you are today, but thank you very much. And Thawra Hmaidan, who is the genius of Thawra TV, the inspiration and soul. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss. There's so much more to talk about. We will try and come back to you all with further discussion, but we'll stay on top of it all. And we'll sign off now. And I'll sign off from Manchester City tomorrow. Everyone needs to somehow watch the Lebanese Cedars rugby league team playing against Ireland in Manchester. That's why I'm here. We're going to cheer them on online or whatever way you can do it.
Yes.
It's very important for Lebanon, for the spirit of the team. They're trying hard, and I'm very excited to bring that to you on my platforms. And
thank you for all of the Lebanese Aussies to have launched this many years ago. So go Lebanese expats with our rugby national team. That's actually brilliant. So thank you all.
Thank you
all. Thank you, Mark, for giving us the opportunity to give your views on the issues to the diaspora and to the Lebanese people. And Wissam, thank you very much. And yalla, let's keep it up.
All right. I'm going to stop.
Bye.
All right. I'm going to stop recording now.
Okay. Awesome. That was good fun.